A Voyage to Lilliput. Chapter 1. My father had a small estate in Nottinghamshire, and I was the third of 4 sons. He sent me to Cambridge at 14 years old, and after studying there 3 years, I was bound apprentice to Mr. Bates, a famous surgeon in London. There, as my father now and then sent me small sums of money, I spent them in learning navigation and other arts useful to those who travel, as I always believed it would be some time or other my fortune to do so. 3 years after my leaving him, my good master, Mr. Bates, recommended me a ship's surgeon to the Swallow, on which I voyaged 3 years. When I came back, I settled in London, and having taken part of a small house, I married Miss Mary Burton, daughter of Mr. Edmund Burton, hosier. But my good Master Bates died 2 years later, and as I had few friends, my business began to fail, and I determined to go to sea again. After several voyages, I accepted an offer from Captain W. Pritchard, master of the Antelope, who was making a voyage to the South Sea. We set forth from Bristol on May 4th, 1699. Our voyage at first was very prosperous. But on our passage to the East Indies, we were driven by a violent storm to the northwest of Van Diemen's Land. 12 of our crew died from hard labor and bad food, and the rest were in a very weak condition. On the 5th of November, the weather being very hazy, the seamen spied a rock within 120 yards off the ship. But the wind was so strong that we were driven straight upon it, and immediately split. 6 of the crew, of whom I was one, letting down the boat, got clear of the ship, and we rowed about 3 leagues, till we could work no more longer. We therefore trusted ourselves to the mercy of the waves, and in about half an hour the boat was upset by a sudden squall. What became of my companions in the boat, or those who escaped the rock or were left on the vessel, I cannot tell, but I conclude they were all lost. For my part, I swam as fortune directed me, and was pushed forward by wind and tide, but when I was able to struggle no longer, I found myself within my depth. By this time the storm was much abated. I reached the shore at last, about 8 o'clock in the evening, and advanced nearly half a mile inland, but could go no further, but could not discover any signs of inhabitants. I was extremely tired, and with the heat of the weather I found myself much inclined to sleep. I lay down on the grass, which was very short and soft, and slept sounder than I ever did in my life for about 9 hours. When I woke, it was just daylight. I attempted to rise, but could not, for as I happened to be lying on my back, I found my arms and legs were fastened on each side to the ground, and my hair, which was long and thick, was tied down in the same manner. I could only look upward. The sun began to grow hot, and the light hurt my eyes. I heard a confused noise about me, but could see nothing except the sky. In a little time I felt something alive and moving on my left leg, which advanced gently over my breast, came almost up to my chin. When bending my eyes downwards, I perceived it to be a human creature, not 6 inches high, with a bow and arrow in his hands, and a quiver on his back. In the meantime, I felt at least 40 more following the first. I was in utmost astonishment, and roared so loud that they all ran back in a fright, and some of them were hurt with the falls they got by leaping off my sides to the ground. However, they soon returned, and one of them, who ventured to get as far as a full sight of my face, lifted up his hands in admiration. I lay all this while in great uneasiness, but at length, struggling to get loose, I succeeded in breaking the strings that fastened my left arm to the ground, and at the same time, with a violent pull that gave me extreme pain, I loosened the springs that had tied down my hair, so that I was able to turn my head about 2 inches. But the creatures ran off a second time before I could seize them, whereupon there was a great shout, and in an instant I fell above 100 arrows discharged in my left hand, which pricked me like so many needles. Moreover, they shot in flight into the air of which some fell on my face, which I immediately covered with my left hand. When this shower of arrows was over, I groaned with grief and pain, and then, striving again to get loose, they discharged another flight of arrows larger than the first, and some of them tried to stab me with their spears. But by good luck I had on a leather jacket, which they could not pierce. By this time I thought it most prudent to lie still till night, when my left hand being already loose, I could easily free myself, and as for the inhabitants, I thought might be a great match for the greatest army they could bring against me, if they were all the same size as him I saw. When the people observed that I was quiet, they discharged no more arrows, but by the noise I heard I knew that their number was increased, and about 4 yards from me, for more than an hour, there was a knocking, like people at work. Then turning my head that way as well as the pegs and strings would let me, I saw a stage set up, about 1.5 feet above the ground, with 2 or 3 ladders to mount it. From this, one of them, who seemed to be a person of quality, made me a long speech, of which I could not understand a word, though I could tell from his manner that he sometimes threatened me and sometimes spoke with pity and kindness. I answered in a few words, but in the most submissive manner, and almost being famished with hunger, I could not help showing my impatience by putting my finger frequently in my mouth to signify that I wanted food. He understood me very well, and descended from the stage, and commanded several ladders should be set against my sides, on which more than 100 of the inhabitants mounted, and walked towards my mouth with baskets full of food, which had been sent by the king's orders when he first received tidings of me. There were legs and shoulders like mutton, but smaller than the wings of a lark. I ate 2 or 3 at a mouthful, and took 3 loaves at a time. This supplied me as fast as I could, with 1,000 marks of wonder at my appetite. I then made a sign that I wanted something to drink. They guessed that small quantity would not suffice me, and, being most ingenious people, they slung up one of their largest goat heads and rolled it toward my hand, and beat out the top. I drank it with a draught, which I might do well, for it did not hold half a pint. They brought me a second hogshead, which I drank, and made signs for more, but they had none to give me. However, I could not wonder enough at the daring of these tiny mortals who ventured to mount and walk upon my body, while one of my hands was free, without trembling at the very sight of so huge a creature as I must have seemed to them. After some time, there appeared before me a person of high rank from His Imperial Majesty. His Excellency, having mounted my right leg, advanced to my face, with about 12 of his retinue, and spoke about 10 minutes, often pointing forward, which I afterward found was towards the capital city about half a mile distant. Whether it was a command by His Majesty that I should be conveyed, I made a sign with my hand that was loose, putting it to the others, but over His Excellency's head, for fear of hurting him or his train, to show them I desired my liberty. He seemed to understand me well enough, for he shook his head, though he made other signs to let me know I should have meat and drink enough, and be very good treatment. Then I once more thought of attempting to escape, but when I felt the smart of their arrows on my hands and face, which were all in blisters, and otherwise that number of my enemies increased, I gave tokens to let them know they might do with me as they pleased. Then they daubed my face and hands with a sweet-smelling ointment, which in a few minutes removed all the smarts from the arrows. The relief from pain and hunger made me drowsy, and I presently fell asleep. I slept about 8 hours, as I was told afterward, and it was no wonder, for the physicians, by the Emperor's orders, had mingled a sleeping draught with the hogsheads of wine. It seems that when I was discovered sleeping on the ground after my landing, the Emperor had taken early notice of it, and determined that I should be tied in the manner that I have related, which was done in the night while I slept, that plenty of meat and drink should be sent to me, and a machine prepared to carry me to the capital city. 500 carpenters and engineers were immediately set to work to prepare an engine. It was a frame of wood raised 3 inches above the ground, about 7 feet long and 4 wide, moving upon 22 wheels, but the difficulty was to place me on it. 80 poles were erected for the purpose, and very strong cords fastened the bandages to which the workmen had tied around my neck, hands, and body. 900 of the strongest men were employed to draw up these cords by pulleys fastened to the poles, and in less than 3 hours I was raised and slung into an engine, and there tied fast. 1,500 of the Emperor's strongest horses, each about 4.5 inches high, were they employed to draw me toward the capital. But while all this was done, I lay in a deep sleep, and I did not wake till 4 hours after we began our journey. The Emperor and all his court came out to meet us when we reached the capital, but his great officials would not suffer His Majesty to risk his person by mounting on my body. Where the carriage stopped, there stood an ancient temple, supposed to be the largest in the whole kingdom, and here it was determined that I should lodge. Near the great gate, through which I could easily creep, they fixed 91 chains, like those which hang on a lady's watch, which are locked to my left leg with 36 paddocks, and while the workmen found it was impossible for me to break loose, they cut all the strings that bound me. Then I rose up, feeling as melancholy as I ever did in my life, but the noise and astonishment of the people in seeing me rise and walk were inexpressible. The chains that held my legs were about 2 yards long, and gave me not only freedom to walk backward and forward in a semicircle, but to creep in and lie at full length inside the temple. The Emperor advanced towards me from among his courtiers. All the most magnificently clad surveyed me with great admiration, but kept beyond the length of my chain. He was taller by about a breadth of my nail of any of his court, which alone was enough to strike awe to beholders, and graceful and majestic. To better behold him, I lay down on my side, so that my face was level with his, and he stood 3 yards off. However, I have had him since many times in my hand, and therefore cannot be deceived. His dress was very simple, but he wore a light helmet of gold, adorned with jewels and a plume. But he held his sword drawn in his hand, to defend himself if I should break loose. It was almost 3 inches long, and the hilt was of gold, enriched with diamonds. His voice was shrill, but very clear. His Imperial Majesty often spoke to me, and I answered, but neither of us could understand a word.